In this video, we're going to talk about Prop 15 and how it could potentially destroy small businesses. Coming right up. Hey everyone, my name is Sean and I'm a real estate investor based here in the Bay Area. And on this channel, we go over real estate investing tips, strategies, and current events to help you learn more about the business and to help you become a real estate investing boss. So in this video, we're going to talk about Proposition 15, what it is, the pros and cons behind it, and how it could potentially change the entire commercial real estate climate here in California. So what is Proposition 15? Proposition 15 is the tax on commercial and industrial properties for education and local government funding initiative for 2020. It has an amazing name and it's going to be on the ballot on November 3rd. You can find all the information that I'm going to go over in this video down in the link on ballotpedia.org, but if you don't want to read walls of text, feel free to just enjoy the rest of this video. So the text on the ballot actually says it's going to increase funding for public schools, community colleges, local government services by changing the tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. The initiative is a constitutional amendment and increases funding for K-12 public schools, community colleges, local governments by requiring that commercial and industrial real property be taxed based on current market value instead of on purchase price. The exemptions from taxation changes are residential properties, agricultural land, and owners of commercial and industrial properties with a combined value of $3 million or less. Any additional education funding will supplement existing school funding guarantees and exempt small businesses from personal property tax. For other businesses, it provides a $500,000 exemption. I know this is a lot to digest, and we're going to definitely go over how everything breaks down a little more in the video. So before going into my thoughts, I'm going to go into the details of the proposition. So the change from the purchase price to market value will be phased in beginning in fiscal year of 2022 to 2023. So they have a little bit of time to get used to the fact that they're going to be paying a lot more in property taxes. Properties such as retail centers whose occupants are 50% or more small businesses will be taxed based on a market value beginning in fiscal year of 2025 to 2026, or at a later date depending on what the legislator decides on. So our small boba shops and restaurants won't get penalized too heavily, at least they have some time to get ready for the incoming wave. Proposition 15 would define small businesses as those that are independently owned and operated, own California property, and have 50 or fewer employees. This ballot initiative would make an exception for properties whose business owners have $3 million or less in holdings in California. These properties would continue to be taxed based on their purchase price. The ballot initiative would exempt a small business's tangible personal property taxes and $500,000 in value for a non-small business's tangible personal property. And state fiscal analysts estimated that upon implementation, the ballot initiative would generate between $8 billion and $12.5 billion in revenue per year. And for some more detail, Prop 15 would make the California state legislature responsible for passing laws for a phase-in of the market value-based tax on commercial and industrial properties, as well as how often these reassessments would occur, no less than 3 years between reassessments, and appeals process for challenging reassessments. That was a lot of detail, and I'm pretty sure half of you are all asleep by now. But don't worry, there's a little bit more before we can go into the actual fun part, which is the analysis. So first, the money that they get would be distributed to A, the state, to supplement decreases in revenue from the state's personal income tax and corporation tax due to the increased tax deductions. So all the money that we lost due to these increased tax deductions, we're gonna now pay back from the extra taxes from this new proposition. And B, we're gonna pay back the counties for implementing this measure in the first place, because there's always added cost for new policies. Secondly, 60% of the remaining funds would be distributed to the local governments and special districts. And then 40% of that remaining balance would then be distributed to the schools and the districts and the community colleges via the new local school and community college property tax fund. Great. The revenue appropriated for education would then be divided as follows: 11% for community colleges, 89% for public schools, charter schools, and county education offices. And there will also be a requirement that schools and colleges receive an annual minimum of $100 adjusted each year per full-time student. So this all sounds great. You just tax big companies and then use that funds to pay back the government for all the money they've already lost. And then from the remaining balance, you can then split it amongst the schools and colleges and whatnot to give the education system a bigger budget. Now, before we go into what Prop 15 really does and how it might affect the local economy, let's go into what Prop 13 is and how Prop 15 is trying to change what Prop 13 gave us. Prop 13 was passed in 1978 as a way to reduce the increase of property taxes for all real estate owners here in California. It limits the amount your property taxes will be to just 1% of your purchase price, and then can only increase by 2% per year or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. And if you guys want to learn more about property taxes and the benefits of owning real estate, you can check out my video over here where I talk about this in more detail. Prop 13 helps keep the property taxes in California in check and prevents it from rising exponentially as our real estate prices increase tremendously as well. And it also creates a very favorable environment for developers who want to create office spaces or even own homes, and it really benefits the buy and hold investor who plans on just holding on to an asset, because it means that their expenses are going to be stable. They're going to have an expected expense every single year that just won't suddenly jump up. Now, the whole point of this proposition is that there have been some commercial owners who have owned these giant complexes for 40 plus years, back in 1978, and their property taxes have only increased by 2% every single year. So even though the building's value might have increased by tenfold, their property taxes might have only gone up by 2 times. What a reassessment would do is it would take the current value of the property and charge the property taxes based on that current value. So in this previous example, where the property value has increased by 10 times, but the property taxes have only increased by 2 times, by suddenly reassessing the same property, their current property taxes would increase by 5 times within that 1 year. So obviously this is a problem. If you were paying $10,000 a year in property taxes, and then suddenly your property taxes increase by 5-fold, now in the very next year, you're gonna be paying $50,000 a year in property taxes. And that's essentially what Prop 15 is about. Prop 15 is basically removing Prop 13 for these commercial real estate owners whose property value is worth over $3 million. Now, before I get into my thoughts and the pros and cons of Prop 15, if you guys have enjoyed this video so far, be sure to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification to see more videos just like this one. Now let's get into the pros and cons of this proposition. So the pros are, other states do it, and they reassess buildings all the time. Honestly, this is what makes investing out of state not the best. Because in California, if you buy a property, then at least you know that your property taxes will be stable, and it's only going to increase by 2% every year. But in other places like Texas and Florida, when you buy it, it's already going to be pretty high, 2.5 to 3% on year 1. But the thing is that property taxes increase as well. So if your property value doubles, then your property tax also doubles because they reassess you almost every single year. But anyways, other states do it, especially for commercial buildings, and more taxes just means more revenue for your local government, which they can then spend on whatever they want. And again, according to that study, Prop 13 is allowing business owners to hold out on paying $12 billion in taxes to California every single year. So California is going to benefit because now all these people who had their property taxes locked up in 1978 rates are now going to be paying 2020 rates, and California is going to get a lot more money. This actually benefits incoming buyers too, because property sellers would sometimes hold out on selling their property because their property taxes are so low. Like if you have a property where your property taxes are so low and you sell it to then buy another property, well, now your property taxes are going to be increased. So might as well just hold on to the property you have. This at least will create more liquidity in the market, because now there's no real benefit to holding on to something longer than you have to. And it benefits buyers because if you buy a new property, you get reassessed on day 1 anyway. So they don't care. They're not held back on 1978 rates. They're gonna be buying at 2020 rates anyway. Similar to developers, even if they had the land for a long time, when they do a new development, then they get reassessed on that parcel as well. There are a lot of supporters for this policy, like Vice President Joe Biden. We have our Zuckerberg Chan advocacy group, and they've donated $2.6 million. Now here's some of the cons with this proposition. So one of them, and the biggest con, is that most of the commercial buildings rent out their spaces in a triple net fashion. So unlike a residential tenant where you have a house and they move in and all they do is pay you rent, in the commercial space, they pay something called triple net, which means that the owner gets a certain amount of money, and then the tenant has to pay for everything else, like the insurance, the property taxes, possibly even maintaining the building. So if you increase property taxes on the landlord, it really actually gets transferred to the tenants of that commercial building. So if you're like a Ross and you're paying for the space in a giant complex, like a retail strip mall, then if the property taxes increase, then you as Ross has to pay for that increase. So it doesn't really hurt the landlord, it just hurts the tenants inside. And this is even more so for a smaller company. Like if they're just a small restaurant or they're a small boba shop, they're not making a lot of money, especially now during COVID. And yet now we're having a proposition that will charge them more for just being there. And that's honestly one of the worst things about this proposition, in that it's really going to hurt the tenant and not necessarily the landlord themselves. Another con that a lot of people are saying is that this is just a way for special interest groups to push for higher and new taxes. Because as we saw before, the first place that all of this is going to go to is to pay back all of the lost revenue that the state of California has had due to these new tax deductions that we've had over the past few years. And then some of that money is going to be paid to funding this campaign. And then 60% of that is going to be funded to some general fund. And then the rest is finally going to go to education. And yet the way this proposition is written is that the name says it's a tax on commercial and industrial properties for education and local government funding. So this is a very pretty name. And if you're a regular voter, you're going to read this and think, I don't care about commercial and industrial properties. It has nothing to do with me, so screw them. But education and local government funding initiative sounds great to me. Doesn't affect me at all. But in reality, it's going to affect the businesses, and eventually the businesses will then pass that cost on to you, the consumer. So ultimately, who pays for this? You do. Yeah, this name is super misleading because, people are going to read this and think, you know what, screw big businesses, and I'm a good person. I want to help this local school fund out. Let's vote on it. But they're not knowing what are the true ramifications behind it, as well as most of the money really isn't going to the schools in the first place. And I also think this is ironic because the government is essentially doing a step function in what they're going to charge these landlords, but they actually prevent step functions from happening from a lot of residents. And they did that with their rent control laws. So very recently with AB 1482, we have nationwide rent control for threeplexes and above. Basically, you just can't increase your rents on a tenant to market rent, even if they were charging way below market rent for the past few years. You have to slowly increase them by a few percent every single year. But in this case, at least they're giving us a few years of heads up before they drastically increase the property taxes on each building. And so what I think is maybe in the next few years, there's gonna be a lot of turnover in the commercial real estate space. We already have a lot of issues due to the coronavirus, where a lot of the small local landlords are having problems because their tenants aren't getting businesses, so then they can't pay rent, which means that the landlords aren't getting rents and they can't satisfy the debt service on their mortgages. So there's gonna be a lot of trading hands in the near future. And that just means that if someone's out there who knows how to make commercial real estate work again, then there could be a lot of opportunities because there's gonna be a lot of sellers out there in the next few years. Another thing that's kind of scary is Prop 15 is a way to remove property taxes from large commercial building owners. And so for the local consumer, we don't care. We're like, you know what? You're rich enough to afford this. Screw you, go pay your fair share of taxes. But what's preventing the state of California from removing Prop 13 from all of the California residents? What if in the future they say, look, there are maybe $50 billion that we could potentially get if we just remove Prop 13 from all the homeowners who have owned homes, since 1978. As people get older, maybe they don't vote anymore. The younger generation wants to buy properties but sees Prop 13 as a barrier to getting a property, and so they might vote against it too. And it's just one of those things where if you give a moose a cookie, he's gonna want a glass of milk. If you give him an inch, they want a mile. It's one of those things where it's pushing the boundaries where Prop 13 is gonna become phased out of our lives. If you agree to remove it for these commercial guys and they're like, no one fought for us then, why would we fight for you now when they're removing it from your personal residence? I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime soon, but it is a possibility. Prop 15 also makes it really hard for businesses to want to do business in California. Like, one of the main reasons why developers create complexes is because they know that even though it is extremely expensive here in California, and even though the political environment is very harsh against landlords, at least they have Prop 13 to look forward to, where if they can just hold on to the property long enough, then eventually it will cash flow and you can make a lot of money. But now it's saying that if your property value increases, then you're gonna have to pay more taxes. And just because your property value increases, it doesn't mean you have the liquidity to pay those taxes. The value is in the asset itself, and you can only get the money from the asset if you do some kind of cash out refinance, or you sell the property, or maybe you sell some shares of the equity. Like, if I have a $10 million home today, does it mean I can suddenly pay 10 times more in property taxes? No, it doesn't make sense. Ultimately, I think that this proposition has very good intentions. The ultimate goal was to take money from businesses that were doing well and then provide it to a part of our government that isn't doing so well, which is our education system. Because we have too many students relative to amount of teachers we have. Everyone knows the school system here isn't the best. But maybe in the future it could be okay because we have COVID now. It is possible that we might completely go to virtual learning. It is possible that we won't need as much funds because we won't need infrastructure. Maybe in the future homeschooling is the way to go. And Is that really such a bad thing? Maybe we can even privatize education so that everyone's more motivated to do things. I mean, in the end, an increased tax is an increased tax. Do you trust that the local government will spend the funds appropriately? I read this section of Rich Dad Poor Dad. The government spending is very different compared to how you would spend if you had the money yourself. It was your business and you had the budget. You'd be very conservative with the money. You would spend the money as wisely as you could. In the government, it's all about spending as much as you can, because if you don't spend your budget, then you lose it next year. So you're more motivated to just spend wildly, even if it doesn't really benefit your cause. So personally, I'm gonna vote no against Prop 15. I feel like this proposition does more harm than good, especially towards these small businesses who are gonna have to pay this increased rents, which means that they're gonna charge more for their food and boba. For me, the funds that they're gonna get are mostly gonna go to a general fund anyway, which means that the state has the luxury to spend on whatever you want. So even though this name has education in it, only a very small fraction would actually go towards education. And again, most importantly, by voting yes on Prop 15, it means that you're basically voting no against Prop 13 from 1978, which means that maybe in the future, you might lose Prop 13 and you're gonna pay a lot more in property taxes if you live in California. Ultimately, politics is politics. There's pros and cons to each side, and no one is really right and no one is really wrong. It's just a matter of your opinion and what you think is best for yourself and for your community. My action to you is make sure you go out and vote. There's almost no excuse to not vote in this current election. You can get any of your ballots mailed to you at home. You just fill out the bubbles and you set it in. It's free, you just have to register, and it's a right. So if you're an American citizen, if you believe in things that are important to you, instead of just complaining all day, make sure you cast your vote. I hope you guys have all enjoyed this video. If you did, please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification to get more videos like this one. And let me know your thoughts on Prop 15. Is this a good thing or a bad thing for Californians? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you next time. Take care.